Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
Good morning and welcome to today's episode. I'm Richard Backus, publisher of University Teaching Edition, and each day I invite you to join me as we reflect on a significant moment from our shared past. Today is November 21st, and we're looking back 242 years to November 21st, 1783. On that autumn afternoon in Paris, two men climbed into a wicker basket attached to a massive decorated balloon. A fire was lit beneath the balloon's opening. The ropes holding it to the ground were released, and for the first time in human history, people rose into the air in controlled, sustained flight. Jean-François Pilatre de Rosier and François-Laurent d'Arlandes flew for 25 minutes, reaching heights of about 3,000 feet, traveling 5.5 miles across Paris. Tens of thousands watched from below as the balloon drifted over the city, past the Seine, and finally descended in fields beyond the city walls. It was a moment humanity had dreamed about since ancient times. The myth of Icarus, Leonardo da Vinci's flying machines, centuries of speculation about how humans might soar like birds, all of it had been fantasy until that November afternoon when two Frenchmen actually did it. The age of human flight had begun, and it happened not through careful institutional research or government programs, but through the vision and risk-taking of private innovators willing to stake their lives on an untested technology. The story begins with two brothers from a paper manufacturing family in Annonay, France. Joseph Michel and Jacques-Étienne Montgolfier weren't trained scientists. They were practical businessmen who happened to be curious about the world. The breakthrough came, according to legend, when Joseph Michel noticed his wife's chemise drying over a fire, billowing upward from the heat. He began experimenting with paper bags held over fires, watching them rise toward the ceiling. The brothers theorized that smoke contained a special gas, they called it Montgolfier gas, that was lighter than air. They were wrong about the cause. It's actually the hot air itself becoming less dense, not anything in the smoke. But being wrong about why something works doesn't prevent it from working. By late 1782, the Montgolfiers were launching increasingly large paper and silk balloons. In June 1783, they conducted a public demonstration in Annonay, launching an unmanned balloon that rose about 3,000 feet and traveled over a mile. Word reached Paris, and King Louis XVI became intrigued. The king commanded a demonstration in Versailles on September 19, 1783. The Montgolfiers sent up a balloon carrying the first aerial passengers, a sheep, a duck, and a rooster. The animals survived the flight unharmed, proving that living creatures could withstand altitude. The question now was whether humans would dare follow. King Louis XVI initially opposed human flight attempts, fearing fatal accidents. When permission was finally granted, the king insisted that condemned criminals should be the first to fly. After all, if someone was going to die in the attempt, better it be someone already sentenced to death than a productive citizen. Pilatre de Rosier, a young science teacher and adventurer, was outraged. He convinced the king that it would be shameful for criminals to receive the honor of being first to fly. That glory should go to volunteers willing to risk everything for scientific achievement. The king relented. Pilatre de Rosier began with tethered flights, rising a few dozen feet, while the balloon remained anchored by ropes. He studied how to control the fire, how to manage the balloon's altitude, and how the craft responded to air currents. He was methodical and cautious in preparation, even though the ultimate act would be anything but cautious. Francois Laurent, the Marquis d'Arlandes, volunteered to join him. Darlandes was a military officer with no scientific background, but he had something perhaps more important: courage and a sense of adventure. The date was set, November 21st, 1783. The location, the Château de la Muette in Paris, on the western edge of the city. The balloon was enormous, over 70 feet tall, made of linen and paper, brightly decorated with golden flourishes, signs of the zodiac, and the king's cipher. On the afternoon of November 21st, tens of thousands of Parisians gathered to watch. Benjamin Franklin was there, serving as American ambassador to France. He understood the significance of what was about to happen. Pilatre de Rosier and Darlandes climbed into the gallery, the wicker basket suspended beneath the balloon's opening. Unlike modern hot air balloons where the burner is separate from the passengers, this design had an open brazier directly in the basket. The two men would need to feed the fire with straw, while also watching for sparks that might ignite the paper and fabric balloon above them. They carried sponges soaked in water to put out any fires that started. At about 1:54 in the afternoon, the mooring ropes were released. The balloon rose smoothly. The crowd gasped and cheered. The two men were flying. Darlandes later described the experience with wonder. Paris spread out below them, the buildings, the Seine snaking through the city, the crowds looking upward. They could see for miles. The sensation of floating, of moving through air, was unlike anything humans had experienced before. But it wasn't a peaceful journey. Several times, sparks from the fire caught the balloon fabric and small flames appeared. The men had to scramble to extinguish them with their wet sponges, while also feeding fuel to the fire to maintain altitude. At one point, they climbed to perhaps 3,000 feet, high enough that people on the ground appeared as tiny dots. The flight lasted 25 minutes and covered about 5.5 miles, crossing the Seine and much of Paris before descending in fields beyond the city walls, near what is now the Place d'Italie. They landed safely, unharmed, triumphant. The impact was immediate and enormous. Paris erupted in celebration. King Louis XVI ennobled both men on the spot. Within days, the news spread across Europe. Within weeks, balloon mania gripped the continent. The Montgolfier flight unleashed an explosion of innovation and mania. Just 10 days later, on December 1st, 1783, physicists Jacques Charles and Nicolas Louis Robert made the first manned flight in a hydrogen balloon, a different technology that could fly higher and longer than hot air balloons. The race was on to push boundaries. Balloon flights became public spectacles. Entrepreneurs charged admission to watch launches. Balloonists became celebrities. Fashion changed. Women's hairstyles were decorated with tiny balloons. Clothing featured balloon motifs. Balloons appeared on tableware and wallpaper. Balloon imagery was everywhere. But more importantly, the human imagination had been transformed. For the first time, sustained human flight was not fantasy, but reality. If humans could fly, what else might be possible? The achievement suggested that nature's limits could be overcome through ingenuity and daring. The military immediately saw potential. The French used observation balloons for reconnaissance. By the French Revolutionary Wars of the 1790s, the French military had a balloon corps using tethered balloons to observe enemy positions from above. The idea of aerial warfare, which would become terrifyingly real in the 20th century, had its genesis in those early balloon flights. Science benefited too. Balloons enabled meteorological observations at altitude. They allowed studies of atmospheric composition and pressure. They made it possible to see the Earth from perspectives previously impossible. But the story has a darker chapter. Pilatre de Rosier, the first human to fly, became aviation's first fatality. In June 1785, less than 2 years after his triumphant first flight, Pilatre de Rosier attempted to cross the English Channel from France to England, using a hybrid balloon combining hydrogen and hot air. The hydrogen, highly flammable, ignited. The balloon caught fire at about 1,500 feet and crashed. Pilatre de Rosier and his companion Pierre Romain died on impact. This tragedy illustrated a truth that would echo through all aviation history. Progress requires risk, and sometimes that risk proves fatal. Every advance in aviation, from balloons to powered aircraft to jets to spacecraft, has claimed lives. The question has always been whether the achievement justifies the sacrifice, and whether those who died did so willingly, understanding the risks. Pilatre de Rosier understood. He chose to fly despite knowing it might kill him. He pushed boundaries because he believed human flight was worth pursuing, worth dying for if necessary. That spirit, that willingness to risk everything for achievement, characterizes every aviation pioneer who followed him. The Montgolfier story reveals patterns that appear in breakthrough after breakthrough throughout history. First, the breakthrough came from outsiders. The Montgolfiers were paper manufacturers, not scientists. They had curiosity and practical skills, but no formal training in physics or engineering. Sometimes that's an advantage. Experts in a field develop assumptions about what's possible and impossible. Outsiders don't know what can't be done, so they try anyway. Second, the theory was wrong, but the practice worked. The Montgolfiers believed in Montgolfier gas, rather than understanding that hot air expands and becomes less dense. Benjamin Franklin understood the principle better than the brothers did. But the brothers had the will to build and test, to learn by doing rather than waiting to perfect the theory. Third, incremental testing preceded the dramatic leap. The Montgolfiers didn't start with human flight. They began with small paper bags, then larger unmanned balloons, then animals, then tethered flights with humans, and only then attempted free flight. Each step taught lessons and built confidence. Pilatre de Rosier's tethered flights were crucial preparation for the untethered attempt. Fourth, success required both innovation and courage. The technology had to work, but someone also had to be willing to stake their life on it. Pilatre de Rosier and Darlan's were volunteers. No one forced them into that basket. They chose risk for the sake of achievement. Fifth, success catalyzed rapid follow-on innovation. Once human flight proved possible, dozens of experimenters began pushing boundaries. Within months, hydrogen balloons flew higher and longer. Within decades, balloons became practical for military and scientific use. The breakthrough opened a door that others rushed through. Today, 242 years after that first flight, the pattern continues in our own age of innovation. We see it in space exploration. The first humans in space, the first moon landing, the development of reusable rockets, all required both technological innovation and human courage. Astronauts and cosmonauts die in the pursuit of spaceflight, just as Pilatre de Rosier died pursuing flight itself. We accept these risks because we believe exploration matters. We see it in technology entrepreneurship. Founders stake everything on unproven ideas. Most fail. Some, like the Montgolfiers, succeed spectacularly and transform entire industries. The pattern is the same: vision, risk, incremental testing, dramatic breakthrough, rapid follow-on innovation. We see it in medical innovation. New treatments require human trials. Someone must be the first to receive an experimental therapy, knowing it might not work or might cause harm. Yet volunteers step forward because they believe the potential benefit justifies the risk. The questions the Montgolfiers faced remain our questions. How much risk is acceptable in pursuit of innovation? Who should take those risks? Should society protect people from their own daring? Or should we honor and enable those willing to venture into the unknown? When someone dies attempting something extraordinary, do we call them heroes or fools? There's no universal answer. It depends on the cause, the likelihood of success, the potential benefit, and most importantly, whether the risk taker understands and accepts the danger. Pilatre de Rosier knew balloons could fail. He flew anyway. We remember him. The Montgolfier flight mattered not just because it achieved human flight, but because it demonstrated that ancient dreams could become reality through ingenuity and courage. For thousands of years, humans had looked at birds and envied them. We told stories about flight, Icarus, the flying carpets of folklore, the magical transport of fairy tales. We drew flying machines in notebooks and dreamed about soaring through air. But it was all fantasy until November 21st, 1783, when two men actually did it. That transformation from dream to reality is intoxicating. If flight is possible, what else might we achieve? The lesson resonates across history. Don't accept that something is impossible simply because it's never been done. If the principle is sound and you're willing to do the work and take the risks, you might just achieve the impossible. The Montgolfiers weren't the smartest people pursuing flight. They didn't have the best theory. They weren't funded by governments or major institutions. They were paper manufacturers who had an idea, tested it incrementally, and built something that worked. Then two men had the courage to climb into a basket and stake their lives on that untested technology. 25 minutes later, humanity had flown. Everything changed because someone was willing to try. Thank you for joining me today on the Daily History Chronicle. As philosopher George Santayana reminds us, those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Today, we saw how the Montgolfier brothers and two courageous passengers transformed an ancient dream into reality through curiosity, incremental testing, and the willingness to risk everything for achievement. A pattern that continues to drive innovation from space exploration to medical breakthroughs to technological entrepreneurship. The next time you board an airplane or marvel at a rocket launch, remember it all traces back to that November afternoon when two men in a wicker basket proved that humanity could fly, and in doing so showed us that the impossible might just be possible if we're bold enough to try. Until tomorrow, may your day be enriched by the lessons of history.